Maria Carmen had been cleaning Ronaldo's Madrid mansion for 3 years, arriving every Tuesday and Friday morning at precisely 8 o'clock with her supplies and her quiet dignity, moving through the sprawling rooms like a ghost who understood that her job was to maintain perfection while remaining invisible, never speaking unless spoken to, never lingering in spaces where she might accidentally overhear private conversations or witness moments that belonged to a family whose wealth existed in a different universe from her own modest apartment in one of Madrid's working-class neighborhoods, where every euro was counted twice before being spent, and dreams were luxuries that people like her couldn't afford to indulge. She was in her late 40s, with graying hair always pulled back in a neat bun and hands that showed the wear of decades spent cleaning other people's homes. And though she spoke little English and even less about her personal life, there was something in her careful movements and respectful manner that had made Ronaldo notice her in ways he didn't usually notice household staff. Perhaps because she reminded him of his own mother's quiet strength during the years when they had struggled to make ends meet, and dignity was sometimes the only thing that couldn't be taken away by poverty or circumstance. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Maria Carmen, arriving with her usual punctuality and beginning her methodical work in the kitchen, while Ronaldo sat at the breakfast table reviewing training schedules and endorsement contracts, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the soft sounds of cleaning and the occasional rustle of papers. But when her phone rang and she stepped into the hallway to answer it, speaking in rapid Spanish that grew increasingly agitated, Ronaldo found himself unconsciously listening to a conversation that he wasn't supposed to hear, but couldn't ignore because the desperation in her voice was impossible to miss. He understood enough Spanish to catch fragments of what was clearly a medical discussion, words like surgery and urgent and insurance, mixing with numbers that seemed to cause Maria Carmen physical pain to speak aloud. And when she ended the call and returned to the kitchen, Ronaldo could see that she had been crying, though she immediately busied herself with wiping down surfaces that were already spotless, trying to hide her distress behind the kind of professional composure that working-class people learn to maintain even when their world is falling apart around them. Maria Carmen, Ronaldo said softly, using her full name, because he had learned early in life that dignity starts with acknowledging people as complete human beings rather than just the functions they perform. Is everything all right? And she looked up with the startled expression of someone who wasn't accustomed to employers showing interest in her personal problems, her instinct clearly being to deflect concern and maintain the invisible barrier that was supposed to exist between people who cleaned houses and people who owned them. But something in Ronaldo's tone made her pause instead of immediately dismissing his question with a polite lie. "My son," she said quietly, her English halting but determined as she struggled to find words for a situation that was complicated enough in her native language. "He needs operation. His heart, the doctors say, is very serious, but the insurance, they say no, too expensive, and I don't have." Her voice trailed off as she realized she was admitting to financial hardship in front of someone whose monthly shoe budget probably exceeded her annual salary. The shame of poverty making her want to disappear, rather than burden someone with problems that seemed unsolvable when viewed from her perspective at the bottom of an economic system that treated healthcare as a privilege rather than a right. Ronaldo set down his papers and gave her his complete attention, recognizing the courage it took for someone in her position to admit vulnerability to someone in his, understanding that she was sharing something that could easily be used against her if he chose to see her personal crisis as a professional liability rather than a human problem that demanded human response. And when he asked her to tell him more about her son's condition, his voice carried the kind of genuine concern that made Maria Carmen realize she was being seen as a person rather than just a service provider. The story that emerged over the next 20 minutes painted a picture of medical bureaucracy and insurance company callousness that Ronaldo found both familiar and infuriating. The kind of systemic cruelty that treats sick children as profit centers rather than human beings who deserve care regardless of their family's ability to pay. And as Maria Carmen described her 14-year-old son Diego's congenital heart defect that had worsened to the point where surgery was no longer optional but a matter of life and death, Ronaldo found himself thinking about his own childhood medical expenses and how different his story might have been if his family hadn't found ways to get him the treatment he needed when he was injured. Diego had been born with a heart condition that doctors had said would eventually require surgical intervention. But the family's insurance had covered the monitoring and medication that had allowed him to live a relatively normal life for 14 years, playing football with his friends and attending school and dreaming about becoming an engineer like many boys his age. But recent tests had revealed that his condition had deteriorated to the point where the surgery could no longer be delayed without risking his life, and the insurance company that had covered his care for years had suddenly decided that the procedure was experimental and therefore not covered under their policy. "They say 60,000 euros, Maria Carmen whispered, the number seeming to physically hurt her to speak aloud because it represented more money than she could earn in several years of cleaning houses, more money than existed in her entire extended family's combined savings, more money than she could borrow or steal or pray into existence, no matter how desperately she wanted to save her son's life. And Ronaldo could see the defeat in her eyes as she contemplated the impossible mathematics of loving a child who needed something that cost more than everything she owned or ever would own. The insurance company's reasoning was as cruel as it was common, classifying Diego's surgery as experimental because it involved a newer technique that had better success rates but cost more than the older procedure that carried significantly higher risks of complications and death, essentially forcing families to choose between financial ruin and accepting inferior care that might kill their children. And when Maria Carmen explained that the older surgery was covered but carried a 30% chance of failure, while the newer procedure had a 95% success rate, Ronaldo felt the familiar anger that came from witnessing systemic injustice disguised as policy. The doctor, he says with the old surgery, maybe Diego dies, maybe he lives, but with problems, but with the new one, he will be normal boy, he can play football, he can run, he can have normal life. Maria Carmen continued, her voice breaking as she described consultations where medical professionals had laid out her son's options in the cold language of statistics and costs, where she had been forced to calculate the value of her child's life against numbers on insurance forms and bank statements that revealed the gap between what love demanded and what reality allowed. Ronaldo had heard enough, his mind already moving beyond the problem to potential solutions, beyond the injustice of the situation to the practical steps needed to save a boy's life. And when he told Maria Carmen that he wanted to help, wanted to pay for Diego's surgery himself, her reaction was everything he had expected and more, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude and shame and relief that came from someone who had been drowning suddenly, finding herself pulled to safety by a stranger who had no obligation to notice her struggle, let alone solve it. No, Signor Cristiano, she protested immediately, her sense of pride and propriety making her reject charity even when it came in the form of salvation. I cannot accept, is too much money. I have nothing to give you back. You are very kind, but I cannot. But Ronaldo held up his hand to stop her, understanding that dignity required her to refuse even when acceptance was the only thing standing between her son and potential death. That working-class pride sometimes made people reject help they desperately needed, because accepting it felt like admitting defeat or acknowledging their own inadequacy. Maria Carmen, he said firmly, this isn't charity. This is one parent helping another parent do what parents are supposed to do, which is protect their children and give them the best chance at life. And if our positions were reversed, if my son needed surgery and you had the money to help, I know you would do the same thing because that's what decent people do when they see a child in danger and have the power to help. And something in his tone made her understand that this wasn't about pity or superiority, but about recognizing shared humanity and responding to it with the resources available. The conversation that followed revealed more about both of them than years of polite employer-employee interactions had accomplished. Maria Carmen speaking about her fears for Diego's future, about lying awake at night calculating impossible budgets and researching medical loans that came with interest rates designed to trap families in permanent debt, about the guilt of not being able to afford the best care for her child, and the terror of making the wrong choice when any choice might result in losing him. While Ronaldo shared his own memories of childhood medical expenses and the anxiety that came from knowing that his family's financial limitations could impact his health and future. "I want to meet Diego," Ronaldo said after they had discussed the practical details of paying for the surgery, after his accountant had been called and arrangements had been made for the money to be transferred directly to the hospital. "I want to talk to him before the surgery, not as someone who is paying for it, but as someone who understands what it's like to be young and scared and facing something that seems too big to handle." And Maria Carmen nodded through tears that had started falling the moment she realized her son was going to live, was going to have the surgery that would give him a normal life, was going to be saved by someone who had chosen to see her crisis as an opportunity to help rather than a problem to be avoided. The meeting between Ronaldo and Diego took place 3 days later at the hospital where the surgery was scheduled, and when the 14-year-old boy who had been trying to be brave for his mother's sake met the football star who had quietly arranged to save his life, the conversation was less about gratitude and more about dreams, about Diego's plans to become an engineer and design bridges that would connect communities, about his love for Real Madrid and his determination to return to playing football once his heart was strong enough to support his athletic ambitions. Ronaldo saw himself in the boy's determination and resilience, in the way Diego talked about his future with confidence despite the medical crisis that had threatened to derail all his plans. And when he signed a football and jersey for the boy, he wrote a message that had nothing to do with fame or football, and everything to do with encouragement and belief in Diego's potential to overcome this obstacle and achieve everything he was capable of achieving once his health was restored. The surgery took place on a Thursday morning, with Ronaldo waiting in the hospital hallway alongside Maria Carmen and her extended family, his presence causing a minor commotion among hospital staff who weren't accustomed to international celebrities sitting in their waiting rooms, but he had insisted on being there because he understood that some gestures matter more than money, that showing up means something different than just paying for something, that Diego and his family needed to know they weren't alone during the most frightening hours of their lives. When the surgeon emerged after 4 hours to announce that the procedure had been successful, that Diego's heart was functioning normally and his prognosis was excellent, the celebration that followed included not just relieved family members, but a football superstar who had invested emotionally as well as financially in a positive outcome, who had been genuinely worried about a boy he had met only once, but who had reminded him of his own childhood struggles and the importance of having people who believe in your potential, even when circumstances seem designed to prevent you from reaching it. The recovery period that followed became an extended relationship between two families from completely different economic circumstances who had been brought together by crisis and connected by generosity. Ronaldo visiting Diego regularly during his hospital stay and rehabilitation, bringing signed memorabilia for other sick children on the ward, and talking with doctors about other families who might be facing similar financial obstacles to necessary medical care, his interest extending beyond this single case to the broader issues of healthcare access and insurance company policies that seemed designed to deny care rather than provide it. Diego's return to normal activities 6 months after surgery marked not just his personal victory over heart disease, but the beginning of a friendship that would last for years, with Ronaldo continuing to follow the boy's academic progress and athletic development, attending his graduation from secondary school, and celebrating when he was accepted into university engineering programs, proof that investing in people's potential creates returns that can't be measured in financial terms, but matter more than money ever could. Maria Carmen continued working for Ronaldo's family, but their relationship had fundamentally changed from employer-employee to something more complex and meaningful, a connection based on mutual respect and shared experience of what it means to fight for children's futures. And though she never stopped feeling grateful for what he had done, she also came to understand that his intervention had been motivated not by charity, but by recognition of their common humanity and the responsibilities that come with having resources when others are in need. The story of Diego's surgery never became public during his childhood, Ronaldo ensuring that the family's privacy was protected and that the boy could grow up without the burden of being known as someone who had been rescued by a celebrity. But years later, when Diego had graduated from university and established his own engineering firm, specializing in projects that brought infrastructure to underserved communities, he would speak publicly about the importance of generosity and the ways that one person's decision to help can change not just individual lives, but entire family trajectories across generations. The lesson that both families learned from their experience was that wealth and poverty are often accidents of circumstance, that the distance between security and crisis can be smaller than people want to admit, and that the most meaningful use of privilege is recognizing when you have the power to solve someone else's problem and choosing to act on that recognition without expecting recognition or reward. Because some gifts are given not to make the giver feel good, but simply because they need to be given by someone who can give them to someone who needs to receive them.